convinced?
No, I think Bishop Tilda Swinton is way off there because women were never ordained in the history of the church to the priesthood or to the bishopric. It's always been forbidden. And again, it's just liberation theology that he's pushing. And then he says he's not personally pushing liberation theology, but actually it is liberation theology. He's already contradicted himself. That is what you said.
That's not what I
Literally,
said.
everything you laid out was liberation theology.
What you described as liberation theology was not liberation theology. I never said.
I said your definition, your opening statement. Your opening statement was liberation theology.
Obviously, you've got a problem with liberation theology, but that's your problem.
Your opening statement, and it's not historical Christianity.
I didn't ascribe to liberation theology. I said your definition.
You outlined inclusivity. Inclusivity
was not what liberation theology.
Jay Dyer makes his first appearance on Piers Morgan Uncensored to completely take down these woke wolves in religious sheep's clothing. Jay Dyer was on a panel with Father Pope Francis Glazer right here, and with Bishop this guy, and along with Roger Stone, in order to debate the passing of the Pope and who should be the next Pope, all that good stuff. And as you'll see, these two guys are too woke to function, and Jay Dyer has to go in there and set them straight. Let's see how Jay Dyer does in his first appearance on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
By a lot of Catholics to restore the church back as they see it, and Steve Bannon articulated this very well, I thought, back to a more traditional Catholic church. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, Piers, I think that the death of Pope Francis, it leaves a void, not just in the Catholic Church, but I think in the global fight for justice, compassion, and human dignity. He basically stood as a living rebuke to this rising tide of Christian nationalism and right-wing populism that has infected communities across America and I think even across the world. And while many Christian leaders bowed to politics and political expediency, I think Pope Francis chose the narrow path of principle over popularity. And I think when we talk about traditional Christianity, I think in many respects, those on the right don't even really subscribe to what is traditional Christianity. When we talk about the gospel commanding love and not exclusion, you know, Jesus taught that the greatest commandment was to love God, love your neighbor, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Not to exclude folks, not to deport people, not to choose people based upon their ethnicity or their nationality. So neighborly love and inclusivity is really the Christian doctrine. And I think that the right-wing Christianity and Christian nationalism has strayed far away from that. So I'm not sure what they want to bring it back to, but I think Pope Francis was steering it in the right direction.
Okay, Jay Dyer.
So many red flags there. You know, whenever someone talks about like a human dignity and compassion, before those used to be just normal words that you would hear and you'd be like, oh yeah, makes sense. But then when you hear people like this talking like that, well, now when I hear those words, it brings up red flags. It's like when they talk about empathy and stuff. Before that was a normal word. Now it's kind of like a buzzword for the woke lefties. But imagine being like a Christian. By the way, I wasn't paying attention. Is this dude a Christian right here? I'm assuming he is. But this dude coming from the place of, you know, hippie Jesus, hippie God, where you just love one another and you could just be free to do whatever you want as long as you just love each other and such. And that's not what Christianity is about. Yes, it teaches love thy neighbor, indeed. It teaches compassion. It teaches loving your fellow man. But it's not like in this woke, warped, hippy-dippy way that people like this gentleman right here like to push it as.
So you're pulling some faces there. You clearly don't agree. So why?
Well, first of all, I don't know if he's a Catholic bishop, a Methodist bishop, what kind of bishop this person is, but the Catholic Church.
Sorry, real quick. This dude's a bishop right here? This dude is a bishop? He's a bishop, and yet he's calling Christian nationalism like an infection. He said infected with this Christian nationalism. How could you be a Christian and call it like an infection?
Used to teach that it's the duty of Christianity to set boundaries. It's not, number one, inclusivity. That's a modern term that's been added. Jesus himself set boundaries. Jesus himself said, that if you love me, you keep my commandments. And that includes the teachings of the church. So this idea that Christianity is just this open, feel good, kumbaya thing is completely made up. It's completely liberation theology. And that's why people like this guy love Pope Francis. Proves Bannon's point that Francis was a liberation theologian.
Not liberation theology.
It literally is. It's identical to liberation theology. What you said is word for word liberation theology. Yes, it is. Pedagogy of the oppressed.
Exclusion and demonization of people is not what Jesus taught. He taught to
What
welcome.
did he say about the Pharisees?
But my point would be on this, Bishop Tilda. Well, hang on. My point would be this. You know, I don't remember when Barack Obama was deporting 3 million people from the United States when he was president. I don't remember the Pope whacking him. It did seem to me that Pope Francis, who I personally had a lot of time for and respected hugely, but when he went out of his way to attack Trump, I did think that was deviating out of a norm. You know, why should Trump be attacked for his immigration policies when Obama, a Democrat president, had deported millions of people?
Well, I think the major difference is Trump ran his campaign on the promise of mass deporting individuals.
But what's the difference? I mean, one promised to do it and then didn't do it quite as much as his predecessor. Obama deported way more people than Trump ever did in his first term. Way more.
Well, and there were many, and particularly those of us from the liberation theological perspective, who condemned Obama for those deportations.
But the Pope did. The popes of the day.
I thought you weren't a liberation theologian. I thought you weren't. Now you are.
I didn't say I wasn't. I said what you were saying was not liberation theology.
Okay, let me bring in Roger Stone. Roger, let me just start by reading something.
Now you are.
I didn't say I wasn't. I said what you were saying was not liberation theology.
Okay, let me bring in.
Yeah, I caught that too. I was like, well, wait a minute. So is he a liberation theologian or not? And it's so crazy, like the pretzels that the left twist themselves into in order to say, well, why they didn't care as much as when Obama deported millions of people, but now that Trump's deporting people, oh, that's a bad thing. Like, clearly, when Obama was doing this, they weren't sounding the alarms as much as they do with Trump. Like, let's face it. It's just all orange man bad. That's it. The orange man bad cult. It's just whenever Trump does it, it's bad. But whenever they do it, whatever.
Stone. Roger, let me just start by reading something you posted on X. The day after the Pope died, Pope Francis essentially gave the Chinese Communist Party veto power over who the bishops of the Catholic Church could be in China. Because God's judgment is perfect, Pope Francis burns in hell for his accommodation with evil. Did you really mean that, Roger Stone?
Well, it may have been a bit extreme, but here is the point.
Think?
When I grew up, and I'm relatively, I'm relatively new in my faith walk. I was baptized a Catholic, but I have also only more recently been redeemed in the blood of the cross. But let me say this: when I grew up under the Catholic Church of Fulton Sheen, the Catholic Church was a bulwark against anti-communism or against communism, against authoritarianism, whether it was in China or whether it was in Russia or whether it was in Poland. So yes, I find the accommodation with the Chinese Communist Party, which is one of the most brutal, vicious regimes on the face of the earth. This is a place where those who practice Falun Gong are arrested and their organs are harvested. I find accommodation with evil to be evil itself. The Pope's embrace of Marxism, his acceptance of a crucifix from the leader of, I think it was Bolivia, that was adorned with a hammer and sickle. That is not the Catholic Church of Pope John II that I prefer.
Okay, Alberto Cuti, I can see you nodding there. Do you agree with Roger Stone?
I'm a Cuban American, so I wrote the Pope a letter in 2015 when he went to meet with Fidel Castro, the dictator, the oppressor. My father was a political prisoner twice, and I said to the Pope directly, and I love Pope Francis, by the way, but I disagree with him in his politics. He said straight out, I said to him, listen, you condemn capitalism quite frequently, but you never condemn communism and socialism and all the harm that it has done. I mean, Communism is, in fact, an atheist doctrine. It rejects God. And so for me, it was very difficult, as a Cuban American from this community, to see the Pope, who we believe is the successor of St. Peter, the Bishop of Rome, who we look up to and admire, as someone that would go and embrace the oppressor and not the oppressed. And there were people who wanted to meet with him, by the way, the ladies in white in Havana, who protest after Mass. There were people that wanted to meet with the Pope and wanted to be heard, but they made no time for the oppressed. They did have time for the oppressor, and that was very offensive to us as the Cuban American community.
Yeah, Bishop Tilda Swan, what's your response to that?
Well, I think he would be accurate if that's the case, because I believe wholeheartedly what the late James Cone said, that any authentic theology must affirm that God is on the side of the oppressed. In many respects, Francis's papacy defended, the marginalized, the poor, the disabled, the planet itself, and his critiques to many of us who followed him were not political, but they were profoundly theological. Obviously, there were some inconsistencies in his in the actions around his theological perspective.
Yeah, Jay Dyer, you've been very critical of Pope Francis, said the next Pope needs to stop bending the knee to wokeness, to ecumenism, to ultimately a one world religion in particular. It did seem that whatever side of the Pope Francis debate you sat, everyone accepted he was a pretty liberal Pope by the standards of modern popes. And, liberalism in the sort of more progressive interpretation of it has been repudiated all around the world pretty much in political elections, which would lend some succor, I would argue, to the thought that maybe the Pope should move with the actual times, which is to be perhaps a bit more traditional, to be less progressive. But actually many Catholics have actually recoiled against the attempt to make it more progressive.
Yeah, but the problem is, and when Bannon was on earlier, he made some great points on this issue. But the problem is that you've already dogmatized the documents of Vatican II in the Roman Catholic system. So there is no way to go back to a pre-Vatican II church or to create some new reform movement. There's multiple statements from the Vatican itself, particularly Francis, more recent in 2017, even said that the reforms of Vatican II are irreversible and magisterial. So there is no way to go back to some pre-Vatican II church. It's just a fiction that a lot of traditional Catholics tell themselves. And of course, I'm a big fan of Francis because he is a great apologist for Orthodox Christianity. We've had more people convert to Orthodoxy under Francis than ever before. So he's sending them our way. And I don't think you're going to get anybody better than Francis, since he appointed 108 of the 135 cardinals. They're all going to be Francis 2.0.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I think that is likely to happen. Roger Stone, one of the issues that Pope Francis fully embraced was the war in Gaza, but he seemed to fully embrace it from a pro-Palestinian perspective.
Gosh, every stereotype, pro-Palestinian perspective. Like, of course the Pope did that. Like, how is the woke mind virus not a virus at this point? The way that it infects people's brains, where even the Pope is not immune to this. What are your thoughts on this so far, though? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you liked it. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you really like it. Let's continue.
I think he famously, every evening, he telephoned a Catholic church in Gaza throughout the entire war, right up to his death, every night. I think he made this phone call. But his position seemed to be so partisan, if you like, towards the Palestinian position on it, that Israel removed condolence tweets to the Pope it had put out and only sent an envoy to the funeral. There was a perception he was quite anti-Israel. A, do you agree with that perception? And B, is it important, whoever becomes the next Pope, that they are not perhaps seen to be taking sides in a war like that? Or is the point of a Pope that he should take sides sometimes?
No, I think he's yet another example of the Pope getting into politics. He has no criticism for Marxism but he criticizes capitalism. He has no criticism for radical Islam, but he praises or reaches accommodations with the Chinese. He calls President Trump's immigration policy anti-Christian, interference in an American election. I'd like to return to a time when the Pope speaks to matters of faith. The church certainly needs it, but he needs to stay out of American and frankly, world politics. That is not his role.
I mean, what is the role of the Pope as far as you're concerned?
It is to speak to matters of the Bible and the church and church dogma. But I do think he has an obligation to oppose oppression and authoritarianism and brutality, whether it is on the left or the right.
Okay, Alberto Coutier, there's obviously a huge battle going to rage over who the next Pope should be. As J. Dyer said, a large number of these cardinals were basically appointed by the progressive Pope Francis. So it is highly likely that you're going to get, Pope Francis Mark II coming through this, but not a certainty. Steve Bannon talked about Cardinal Robert Sarah from Guinea, who said that mass migration is destroying the West, argued that Islam will replace it. He would also, if he won, would be the first black pope. For many on the conservative side, or more traditionalist side of Catholicism, he would be a good option. But is there any chance that someone like him actually wins?
I don't think that if you have a college that's going to be about 133 of them, I believe, 108 of them have been appointed by Francis. And yes, Pope Francis is a restorer, if you will, of Vatican II ideology, but I don't consider him a liberal, not one bit. I've known Cardinal Bergoglio, or I should say Pope Francis, since he was Cardinal Bergoglio. I knew him in the Vatican. I worked with him and people who worked with him. I still have friends that are very close to him. To call him a liberal is to not understand Pope Francis. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Nobody wants to talk about that. And nobody really knows what a Jesuit is thinking. But believe me, this man's far from liberal. And he was progressive in many of his views of the world. But to call him a liberal would be to misunderstand his entire papacy.
You yourself had to leave the Catholic Church because you fell in love with a woman. Does the Catholic Church need to have a more...
You fell in love with a woman? Only young boys around here, sir. You need to get out. I'm kidding, of course, I'm kidding.
Liberal view of these things? I mean, should it be...
The Catholic Church has plenty of married priests. He says people don't know that. And all the Eastern rites of the church, celibacy is optional. Celibacy is only mandatory in the Western rite, which is where I was born and raised. Now, I do believe celibacy is a good thing for the church when it is lived well. When there is chastity, when people are living their life dedicated to God. Celibacy becomes tragic when it's a place to hide homosexuality, to hide other types of situations. And unfortunately, for many in the world, celibacy has become that, if you will. It's become kind of a way of life rather than what it's meant to be, a total dedication to God. At the same time, I want to say that there are many celibate priests that are good, that are happy, that are dedicated. But the fact is, there are many priests who are married. If an Anglican, for example, that grows up Anglican, Church of England or Anglican somewhere else in the world, becomes Roman Catholic, he can come with his wife and children, and he's permitted to be a priest in the church. And a lot of people don't know that. We do have married priests, plenty of married Catholic priests.
You're suggesting there's a pretty large dollop of double standard going on.
I don't know if it's a double standard. I think it has to do with canonical practice. All the last three popes have said openly, since St. John Paul II, Pope Benedict, they've said celibacy is a discipline of the church. It's not a dogma. It's not a doctrine, but it can change in the future. They were all open to that change. Even Pope Benedict, I know, sent out several questionnaires about it to other cardinals. He's not the first pope that's done that.
Bishop Tilda Swan, is it time for women priests in the Catholic Church?
Well, I think it's time for women priests and preachers across the board throughout Christianity. I think even in my denomination, where we do not ordain women, we are behind the times when it comes to recognizing the full humanity, the talents and the gifts of women, and what their contributions can be toward ministry.
Jay, you don't look...
Especially women of color. We need to get more of them as priests.
Convinced?
No, I think Bishop Tilda Swinton is way off there because women were never ordained in the history of the church to the priesthood or to the bishopric. It's always been forbidden. And again, it's just liberation theology that he's pushing. And then he says he's not personally pushing liberation theology, but actually it is liberation theology. He's already contradicted himself. That is what you said.
That's not what I said.
Literally everything you laid out was liberation theology.
What you described as liberation theology was not liberation theology. I never said
I said your definition, your opening statement. Your opening statement was liberation theology.
Obviously, you've got a problem with liberation theology, but that's your problem.
Your opening statement, and it's not historical Christianity.
I didn't ascribe to liberation theology. I said your definition.
You outlined inclusivity. Inclusivity
was not what liberation theology.
But Jay, all right, let me hang on. Time out. Jay, out of interest, why should there not be women priests?
Well, it's not what Christ laid down. Christ laid down the tradition of the church to only have a male priesthood and to only have women being in a certain role. It's not that women can't be involved in the church. And you notice his fallacy there. He said that it means that he said women are not fully human. And if you don't believe in them being in the priesthood, it has nothing to do with their humanity. It has to do with roles. And women are not made for every role. They're not made to be in men's sports, for example, right? It's the same logic that this guy has in terms of his liberation theology.
My name is Bishop Talbert Swan. My name is not this guy. You've been dealing with me in a very disrespectful
Bishop
manner.
Tilda Swinton, excuse me. Bishop Tilda Swinton, excuse me.
Talbert Swan.
Bishop, this guy, very upset right now, very triggered. Why does this priest right here, why does he keep like shaking his head? Like what is Dyer saying that is just false? I would like to hear his input. I like to see him and Jay go back and forth. Hopefully they get into that.
Let's try and keep things respectful. Roger Stone, should there be women priests?
I think not. I don't think that that's what the Bible says. I don't think that's what God had in mind. The other problem I have here, Piers, is the fact that Cardinal Francis brought back Cardinal McCarrick, who we know was a vicious pedophile, appointed him as a special counselor. I think this sends a terrible sign. The church has been plagued by pedophilia. The church has dealt with it, but to bring McCarrick back, who was ultimately defrocked once we learned how horrific his crimes were, is a very bad sign, and yet another I think, accommodation with evil by Pope Francis.
If I can come back to you, Alberto Coutier, the continuity choice, as he's being described, is the Vatican Secretary of State and Pope Francis's chief advisor, Pietro Parolin. He's the bookie's favorite, but would he just be literally doing exactly what Pope Francis would want him to do? And is that a good thing for the Catholic Church right now?
I think everyone is a good candidate, to be honest with you, all 133 of them, because the fact is, we have a saying in the church, right? If he goes in a pope, he comes out a cardinal. That we don't really know who will be elected. But I'll tell you this: Parolin was one of the closest people to Pope Francis from the very beginning. I'm sure he would continue a lot, but remember, everyone has their personality. There will not be another Francis. And who knows what the next person will bring. Maybe the person will bring more unity among conservatives and liberals. I have seen from a distance, I've been an Anglican for 16 years now, but I was a Roman Catholic priest for 15 years. And I can tell you that I've never seen so much disunity in the Roman Catholic Church, especially in the US, you know, between extreme liberals, like to the point where they go nuts, and to the, you know, the extreme conservatives with the point everything has to be this way. And in Latin, I mean, they've got to at some point come together as a church. It happens to us as Anglicans. It happens in every church where there's extremes. But I think with Pope Francis, there's been more division among ideological groups than I've ever seen in the recent history of the church. So whoever comes next needs to be a unifier, is what I think, and needs to kind of bring back people and not, I mean, if you really say, like he said, that the church is for everyone, it's got to be for everyone. You know, and ideologically, we have to be open enough. And I agree with the bishop 100%. You know, the Bible teaches us inclusion, love one another. That's the number one rule Jesus Christ left the church. Love one another as I have loved you. If we're not about love, then we can't be the church of Jesus Christ.
But if you're going to be the church of inclusion, the Catholic Church, should it not include women priests?
Well, I think women have the right to be priests. I think that the book of Genesis says God created us male and female in his image. women and men both image Jesus
Also,
Christ.
is there much doubt, really? I mean, obviously, Jesus Christ was of a time. If he was around
Right.
today, I can't imagine in a million years that Jesus Christ would not think it perfectly reasonable, fair, and equitable to allow women priests. It was only that he made
I
that
can't tell
calculation.
my daughter, oh, you can be a judge in the Supreme Court of your country, but you can't be clergy in your church. And I'm not saying that the church has to go that route, but the Pope himself, Pope Francis, nobody talks about it now. He was exploring women deacons during the early years of his papacy. He sent out documents to many bishops and cardinals and advisors in the world, men and women theologians, and he was this close to getting into that ordination of women, to at least the diaconate, which is the first of all the orders in the church. And I got to be honest with you, I'm surprised he didn't go through with it, because even though my brothers here say it's not in the Bible, Phoebe was a deacon, and she's in the New Testament, and she was a deacon in the time of Paul. So I believe that there are deacons and there are priests in the early church, even though we may not want to recognize it now.
Yeah, Jay Dyer, I mean, I just can't imagine a modern day Jesus Christ would not have a modern view of this. I mean, it was a view at the time only dictated by social reality and norm. It wasn't dictated by anything else, surely. And if you are going to preach inclusion, then what's inclusive about only allowing men to be priests? It seems very sexist.
Well, I mean, I don't preach inclusion. I don't think that is the essence of the gospel or Jesus' teaching. I think both the people flanking me have chosen one side and one piece of what Christ taught and neglected the rest of what he taught, which is boundaries, which is tradition, which is what the church handed down. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church itself has always forbidden this, and the fact that Francis was exploring it literally proves Francis's revolutionary ethos. I mean, the Anglican guy next to me said that Francis wasn't a liberal, and then he literally lists all the liberal policies that show he was a liberal. The fact that he's a Jesuit has nothing to do with whether he's liberal or not. It proves the point that, yeah, Francis is a revolutionary, and Jesus laid down a tradition that is unchanging. And the church itself already said you can't change these things. So it would just be contradicting the religion, and it would make Christianity into cuckianity. Okay, let's end with our...
I like that. Cuckianity. Yeah, it's probably what, like these two other guys right here believe in. Cuckianity. A cuckian priest right here. And a cuckian bishop. Bishop this guy. I expect Piers to say something like that because he doesn't, I don't know how religious he is, but he doesn't seem seriously religious. So of course he would say, oh, why don't you let in women priests? It seems kind of sexist to me. Like, well, of course you're going to say that. I think Jay Dyer puts it perfectly well. It's not just about inclusion. Men and women are meant for different roles. It wasn't just like, oh, this came out. It's because Jesus said it back in a more sexist time, a more primitive time, and that's why and therefore. And we need to progress. We need to start seeing like women and men's roles as less of like a rights thing or less of a rights thing and more of just what roles are they better suited for.
All of you the same question. Who would you like to see elected the next pope? I'll start with you, Bishop Talbot Swan.
Well, I think that many hope to see the church retreat from the progressive path that Pope Francis chartered during his papacy. And I believe that they want the next pope to bless their nationalism, to justify their cruelty, and basically baptize their greed. I don't think that should happen. I think the next pope, whoever he is, should be selected based on not on the comfort of the powerful, but on the cries of the vulnerable, and stand firmly in the tradition of prophetic Christianity, one that centers what Jesus called the least of these, rather than catering to the fears of the privileged.
So give me a name.
I think there are several popes that he charted a path so that potentially we could have, for the first time ever, an African pope, someone who is Black, and I think that may be in the best interest, and so I'd like to see it happen.
Okay, Roger.
Yeah.
My God, this dude, Bishop, this guy, you're insufferable, dude. Like, it's so predictable. Of course you're going to be like, well, we need to get a Black guy in there. Like, of course you're going to say something like that. Every stereotype, this woke dude right here, woke bishop, this guy, listed off. I'm just surprised he didn't say, well, we need to get a black woman in there as bishop, a powerful, strong black woman. Like, why didn't he just go that right? Just go all the way, man. Just go all the way. We're all expecting it. All of us. We were all expecting you to say those things.
Stone.
I think there are three choices
Okay,
in
Roger
that
Stone.
category.
Roger Stone, who should be Pope?
Well, first of all, that was a bastardization of what we believe. But secondarily, I guess I would go with Cardinal Sarah as my first choice, Cardinal Erdo of Hungary as my second choice. But keep an eye on the dark horse. That would be Pizzabola, who I think is a very interesting choice, who may be able to bridge this gap and have a more unified church.
Okay.
Yes, a delicious Pizzabola. In all seriousness, well, I don't really have deep investment on who becomes the next pope. I've heard a little bit about that Sarah guy. That Sarah guy seems like he's a pretty good choice. But then at the same time, I would love to hear more about my Pizzabola.
Alberto Coutier, your choice.
I hope he uses the name Francis II, just because I do believe that we need more of that Franciscan spirit in the church, the humility, the simplicity. I love his shoes, by the way. I don't know if you saw the shoes in the casket. Normal working man. Speaks a lot about the man. But the other thing is this, that young Filipino, Cardinal Tagle, he's an Asian. The church in Asia is growing leaps and bounds. And that would bring someone young, energetic, like John Paul II was when he started his papacy. And I really do believe that someone like that would be great. But I say it again, whoever God wants, that's who I want.
Okay. J. Dyer, who should be the next Pope?
Well, Katy Perry went into space and contacted the divine feminine, so I guess the guy's flanking me. Maybe Katy Perry would be the next option, since she's a woman. She's met the divine feminine, the goddess, out in space, and maybe we need to evolve into worshiping the goddess.
Katy Perry to be the next Pope. Let's leave it on that bombshell.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I know Jay Dyer is joking, but that suggestion is just as ridiculous as like what these two guys right here were suggesting. Especially this dude right here, man. Did he have like a crush on Pope Francis or something? Like, man, he is like the biggest Pope Francis glazer right here. Nothing but, oh my God, Pope Francis, he's so great. He's so amazing. He's such a dreamboat. Like, dude, get off his junk, man. Go into this man's bedroom. I guarantee you will be seeing Pope Francis teeny bopper magazines on his wall. I think this was a great first appearance by Jay Dyer. Hopefully we see more of them, especially to school woke clowns like these two gentlemen who have no business being involved in the church with that type of ideology. It is polluting the church. It is polluting religion, just like how it pollutes everything it infects. But what did you guys think about this, though? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you liked it. And if you really liked it, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you like seeing if you like seeing Piers Morgan panels like this, I got a whole playlist for you, bud, that you could watch and enjoy.